The 80s were no doubt the best decade for slashers. In fact, over 100 slashers were released in the years 1980 to 1984. There were many very popular slashers like the Friday franchise, the Nightmare franchise, and the Halloween franchise. But for every Nightmare film, there was a slasher that slipped through the cracks. One good example being Hell High, released in 1987. Now, on the surface, Hell High is often viewed as just another dumb slasher released to cash in on the craze. But beneath this dumb slasher, it's actually a film that has a lot to say about society. Welcome to the Horror Seminar, and today we'll be talking about Hell High's critique on societal systems and its influence on masculinity. To start off, let's look at how this film sets up characters. The film starts off with a young girl, Brooke Storm, witnessing and causing the deaths of two bikers. One of the bikers is a man who is presented as being very aggressive and overly dominating, introducing the theme of toxic masculinity, which will be further developed as the film progresses. We fast forward 18 years later and are reintroduced to that same girl, who has now become a teacher with not so pleasant sets of students. Two of Miss Storm's students are Dickens and John, and the way they are introduced gives us some hints about their characters. Dickens is seen in a dark red jacket, which connotes his status as a menace. That is very evident in this scene, as he's currently being a menace to the class. He also shares some similarities to the biker from the opening scene, which sets him up as this film's main allegory for toxic masculinity. This is opposed to John, who wears a caramel colored sweater and a brown tailcoat. The earthy color palette of his costume connotes a calm and grounded personality, as opposed to Dickens' active, fiery personality. There's also a mid-shot of John's face, allowing us to see his soft facial expression. Here, John is presented as having a more balanced masculinity. This introduction sets up Dickens as an antithesis to John and an adversary to Miss Storm. The relationship between Dickens and John is a good example of the binary opposite theory coined by Levi Strauss. This is the idea that stories and narratives are built around contrasting ideas and concepts. Dickens representing toxic masculinity and being set up as the villain, and his opposite John representing a more balanced approach to masculinity and being set up as the hero. Keep this theory in mind because the film plays with and challenges it as it goes on. Later in the hallway, we learn something very interesting. Dickens and John are actually really good friends. This creates an interesting dynamic between them because normally this isn't supposed to happen, and that's one issue I ran into during my first analysis. I thought the film was going to rigidly stick to the opposite stuff, but it didn't. This is also reflected in the mise-en-scene, which creates an atmosphere of closeness and familiarity between the two characters. The camera also shoots them like they're a couple in multiple occasions. I guess opposites do attract. A good example of what I'm saying can be seen in the scene where they follow Miss Storm home. The mise-en-scene and symmetrical composition create a sense of balance, with the camera having both of them in frame. Also, there is a triangular blocking between Miss Storm's car, Dickens, and John. This connects all three characters both narratively and thematically, portraying Dickens and John as a dominating and powerful group, and Miss Storm as a dominated and opposed group. But isn't John supposed to be the good guy? What happened? Well, this is the film's first step at subverting John's status as hero. Because even though following Miss Storm home wasn't his idea, he's still a passive participant in the ordeal. They finally reach Miss Storm's home, and the film gives us one of the most gratuitous nudity ever put to screen. I guess at the end of the day, this is still an 80s slasher. What's really important about this scene is that John is now an active participant. He doesn't even seem to be questioning what he's doing. Instead, he has a nasty grin on his face. The film cuts to and zooms in on Miss Storm's sensitive areas, and it mimics John and Dickens' gaze and makes us, the audience, hate them even more. This scene shows the dual nature of John's masculinity, telling us that he does possess some of the toxic masculinity that Dickens has. Earlier, on their way to Miss Storm's house, Dickens doesn't actually force John to go with him, and John doesn't protest. signaling that even though John John presents a more balanced masculinity, he still benefits from the troubles initiated by the toxic masculine. Later that night, John John, Dickens, and the rest of their friend group, Queenie and Smiler, go to Miss Storm's house to taunt her. They are planning what to do when this happens.
But she's real. This is big time stuff and real trouble if we blow it.
John John's line is clear evidence of the moral battle going on in his head and how he fluctuates between the toxic and balanced masculine, making him a more complex and realistic character. This is further emphasized by the mask that he wears when they are on Miss Storm's roof. His mask has two faces, one looking slightly human and the other smaller face having a more monster-like appearance. We can read this mask as representing the dual masculinity of John John, the slightly human one representing John John's balanced, if a little bit flawed masculinity, and the small one representing John John's toxic masculinity. The smaller one may be small because that's the part of John John's character that he tries to keep hidden. It could also be a symbolism of John John's id and superego. For those of you that don't know, in Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, id, ego, and superego are three components of the personality that work together to influence thoughts, emotions, and behavior. The id is the primitive part of the personality, driven by basic instincts and desires, while the superego is the moral compass of the personality, representing internalized societal and parental values and expectations. So the mask could basically be a symbol of John John's fight between morality and his desires. The mask could also be a visual metaphor for John John and Dickens, communicating that they are two sides of the same coins, and it may be trying to say that they are complementary to each other. Or it could just be a mask. After taunting Miss Storm, the rest of their friend group leaves while Dickens stays behind to assault her. It's not clear why he's doing this, but luckily his friends stop him before anything goes too far. John John and Dickens get into a fight, and that's when Dickens says this.
Why are you doing this, man? She's part of that system.
It's not clear what system he's talking about, but I'll get to it all later. Mid-fight, Miss Storm jumps out the window and dies, maybe. The film doesn't explicitly state what happens to her. This is where the horror section of the film begins because everyone panics, well, everyone except Dickens. Dickens just looks like his biggest wish came true. In the car, the friends decide to pin the murder on a jock that bullied John John earlier in the film. They send John John to get a belonging of his while the rest of the gang goes back to Miss Storm's house. And that's the last time we see John John in the main action of the film, until the very end, when Miss Storm has killed Smiler and Queenie and is about to kill Dickens. He pushes Miss Storm away from Dickens and unties Dickens. And that's much of a fight we get between our hero and villain. He doesn't even knock her out. Dickens, being in a hysterical state, kills Miss Storm, which makes him feel like the hero instead of John John. John John goes home later and we see the color palette of his room is a very harsh blue. This could either signify the dissociation and sadness he feels as a result of what has just happened, or it could signify that he doesn't really have a happy home life. The next day at school, the jock is arrested while John John has hallucinations of Miss Storm. The film ends with his screams filling up the school hallway, signaling the trauma that has just been passed on to him. So, what does this film have to say about masculinity? Well, I'm glad you asked. In regards to John John, we already know that he isn't the hero we thought he was going to be, and he shows some toxic traits in some parts of the film. He's also missing from majority of the third act of the film, and I interpret this as him being willing to do all these bad things and causing all this trouble alongside Dickens, but then bailing when things get serious and he has to face the consequences of his actions. This is also seen in an earlier conversation between him and Dickens on their way to Miss Storm's house.
We gotta stay clear of the teachers, man. I don't want to blow my A in biology.
From this, we can infer that this good boy nature of Dickens is only an act. This not only portrays him as an unworthy final boy, but also as being very influenced by Dickens. His evil and toxicity isn't inherent, but comes as a result of the time he spent with Dickens. Through John John, the film may be saying that every man, has a toxic and balanced masculine in him, but which one becomes more dominant is based on what or who they spend their time with. We could interpret the film's ending as being a warning to John John not to give in to his toxic side or his teenage desires, making him a tragic final boy. Now let's talk about Dickens and his masculinity because I find it more interesting. We don't get that much explicit info about him other than the fact that he is toxic and the main villain of the film. But for all these things, he seems to really care for his friends to some extent, especially John John. He's never overly mean to them, even when they are to him. We can interpret this as him desperately searching for some sort of family. We don't know much about his home life, but that sort of enigma could mean that it's not a very happy one. His situation could be the reason why he puts on this bad boy persona as sort of like a mask to hide the sadness and dissatisfaction he feels with himself. This could also be why he pretends to be in control all the time. For example, when he tries to intimidate a boy who got injured during a football game. But he's all talk and honestly no act. When Miss Storm slaps him or when John John and Queenie scream at him, he doesn't know how to react and so he just reverts to the bad boy acts and offensive humor as a coping mechanism. This article, Humor in Psychology, states that humor serves as a valuable coping mechanism, helping individuals to reframe challenges and foster resilience. And that's very, very true in Dickens' case, because he uses this bad boy persona as a way to gain respect even though he really doesn't receive it. One way the film tells us that he is not in control as he wishes to believe is during the conversation between Smiler and Dickens. In this conversation, the camera is at a somewhat split diopter style shot, Dickens in the background and Smiler in the middle. Dickens has a relaxed posture as he talks about getting away with the crime he has just committed, but he is in the blurred out background, signifying a false sense of security and control. Another thing I noticed about Dickens is that he seems to be going through some sort of emotional suppression, which I hinted at earlier with his bad boy persona. This is reflected in some scenes where he just steps into space like something occupies his mind. In the scene where he and John John fight, literally that system could refer to his school, which he sees as a sort of repressive force on him, which is why the film could be called Hell High because to him the school is hell. The school is also ruled by adults, which are seen as figures of repression for children, pushing conservatism onto them. This has also been explored in other films, such as The Faculty. To Dickens, Miss Storm is a symbol of that conservatism, which is why he disrespects her at any chance he gets, because he believes that he is the antithesis of everything that Miss Storm stands for. Even though Miss Storm never explicitly states that she's against sexuality, he just believes so. This could be why his mood changes drastically after the shower scene, because now he sees Miss Storm as a hypocrite. This may be why he assaulted her later on as a way to poke fun at her in a sick way. Obviously, I am not justifying his actions, I'm just providing an explanation for what he's doing. This is relevant to the period during which this film was filmed. During the mid 80s, there was a strong moral panic marked by strong censorship of movies and stigma against gay people due to the AIDS crisis. And yes, I know I am applying some gay context to this character, but there is a good chance that Dickens was at least bi and had some sort of feelings for John John, which is seen through his body language. Through various body languages, editing like the one used during the car scene, and various stares, the film creates a homoerotic undertone between John John and Dickens. In the later parts of the film, Dickens begins to taunt John John, maybe as a way to communicate some sort of sexual dominance over John John. This is sad because he's basically having to repress his emotions for John John and cover it up with a bad boy persona again. This paints him as a tragic character whose toxicity comes from societal pressures around him and the conservative atmosphere he lives in. Dickens wants to break free from this conservative atmosphere and repression and stigma, which the school is an allegory for. But if you notice, his jacket looks like a varsity jacket, connoting that he's doomed to be trapped in that state of stigma forever, which makes death look like a better option for him. The film is saying that yes, toxic masculinity is bad, but no one is born with it. Instead, it is developed through the society that men find themselves in. In this case, the vegan society. Hell High is a movie that I wanted to talk about for a long time because not a lot of horror fans and horror communities talk about this movie. And to me, this movie isn't just another dumb movie. It's really good and it's one of my favorite movies actually. So I hope this essay, like, I hope it persuaded you to give it a rewatch or a first watch.